Well, I personally met Father Kram the first summer that I joined the Diocese of Victoria to be a seminarian. Father Gary Yanek invited me to come and to live there in Yoakum. I lived in the garage apartment there in Yoakum.
Okay.
And for that summer prior to entering the seminary. And of course, like many parishes, there's not a lot that goes on in a parish during the summer months with the school being out and such. And Father Gary said, why don't you go to the hospital and spend the morning with Father Kram? And I'd met Father Kram, and I said no. So he took me over to the hospital and said, just go in and they'll introduce you. And I said, okay. So went to the hospital, walked in and asked, I was here to see Father Kram. And they said, well, he's currently getting his throat and lungs vacuumed out through his trach for the fluid that builds up due to his polio. And he will be with you when he's finished with that. I said, okay. So I was kind of a shock to the system, not ever even seeing or knowing Father Kram prior to that. I'm kind of shocked by that. And so I was just kind of waiting, anticipation, what kind of condition this man would be. And he came in with his chin-driven wheelchair and was kind of, the gasping for air so that he could talk. He would rock in order to build up enough oxygen in his lungs, and would speak, not much louder than a whisper, right? And I said, Father Kram, I said, nice to meet you. I introduced myself. This is Brian Heyer, a new seminarian for the diocese, and he was very welcoming. And I said, it sounds like you just had a procedure, we can do this another day. And he goes, no, we're fine. I said, okay. And I said, well, so you're okay? It's still kind of gasping for air. And he says, yes. But there's a patient that just had bunion surgery, and they're having a really hard time. And it was just and I'm like, this man is suffering with not just the immobility of the condition as a result of his polio, but fighting literally for every breath of air, and having his, for lack of a better way to say it, his lungs cleared to be able to breathe better. And his worry was about the patient with the bunion surgery. He really saw and took his mission, his priesthood in that regard of caring for the people of God, right? His people of God was who was ever in those rooms. That was his parishioners. And whether it be bunion surgery or a bad case of the flu or pneumonia, he went and visited each one of those people and comforted them, listened to them, joked with them, and wasn't anything earth-shattering. There wasn't these grand pearls of wisdom dripping from his mouth. It was that was his ministry. That was his life as a priest, and he took it seriously. And he went and visited them, and would visit with the nurses as he went by, as he was there all the time, And then he celebrated Mass, and I did not aid him because I hadn't been at that point really trained to do any of that with the other people the volunteers that aided him in Mass. And it was just, it was so stunning because, when I say these are his parishioners, it's a small country hospital. There maybe was 20 beds in the whole place, and yet that was, and as somebody entering into the possibility at that point of becoming a priest, it really was, can you be a priest like this? Can you be a priest like this if it's something this small with that amount of passion and love? Or a parish of 2,000 families with the same passion and love, and then, because I really, like, up to that point, I had never heard of Father Kram. I had been living outside the diocese for the previous probably 6 years. I was born and raised in Victoria, didn't get out much more out of Victoria as far as my faith was concerned and the practice of my faith. So I really didn't know much outside the city of Victoria, and it's like, wow, out here, and I was really struck, and I would go back and go to Mass and with Father Kram there at the hospital in that chapel that they had there, and it was, and I had extended conversations with the then Father Gary Yannick, who was pastor of Yoakum. This is before he became a bishop, of course, and how for him it was such a great example of what the priesthood is, and not dependent upon the smallest of the assignment or the location of the assignment, but the passion and the love of the priesthood that he had would have served him regardless of where that assignment would have been. So it spoke more to him as a priest, irregardless of his place or his condition. Not just the limitation of a small hospital, but the limitations and things that were shared with me by others, that sometimes he wouldn't get out of bed, not because he was lazy, but they were busy and they could not physically get him out of his moving bed until very late in the morning, closer to noon, and sometimes be so busy in the evening that it would be midnight or longer before they would get him into bed. He was totally dependent on everyone else, and yet so many depended on him who could not do anything physically for anybody. But that's not what a priest is. It's being the priest that shares with them the joy of the gospel. And I see that. I witnessed that. And that was pretty formative as somebody entering into the seminary to study to become a priest. It had great, it caused a lot of reflection in not just entering into, but continuing on throughout the seminary. What does it mean to be a priest? And Father Kram, in a sense, represented that side of the priesthood. Is if you can't do anything, can you still be a priest? And that's, and I know for me as a seminarian, that was very formative. And unfortunately, Father Kram died while I was in the seminary. But I certainly, it's something that's etched in my memory now, almost 30 years ago, right? That memory of that first meeting, and yeah, she had bunion surgery. She's really struggling with it. And it's like, wow, how? I just didn't know how. And every time, just seeing him and his physical struggle did nothing to dampen the spirit or the mission of his priesthood, and remains an inspiration to me today.